From Deloitte Tax, welcome to the Tax News and Views podcast. In this podcast series, we speak with specialists about the latest business issues and developments impacting tax. I'm Emily Van Vliet, a Deloitte Tax partner and one of our tax operate leaders at the firm, and I have the pleasure of being your host for today's episode of the podcast. I'm also really pleased to be joined today by two of our clients. Jim Shea is the Senior Vice President and Chief Tax Officer with Prudential Financial, and Dianne Trinkle is also joining us. Dianne is the Vice President of Tax. So thank you both so much for your time and for joining us for this conversation.
Happy to be here, Emily.
Excellent.
I'm happy to be here as well.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I'll provide maybe just a little bit of context or background for this conversation, and then we'll really dive in and want to give you a chance to share your perspectives on these topics. But what I would share at the outset here is that within Deloitte Tax, we are very focused on working together with our clients to help in-house tax teams transform the way that they operate. And that's important in my mind, first of all, because we face a whole lot of demands on the tax department today, but then our regulatory environment, the technology environment, and the skill sets that tax professionals need are constantly changing and changing very quickly as well. And so one result of all of that we can see really clearly in our market research is that tax operating models have been changing, meaning that the mix of in-house resources and external service providers and process and technology, all of those dynamics are changing. And many tax leaders have been collaborating with service providers like Deloitte in new and different ways as they work to tackle all of these challenges. So I know at Prudential, you have executed your own shift of sorts, right? And so I know you have been working very closely with our Deloitte team, and we've been supporting many of your compliance and reporting responsibilities. So what we'd like to explore in our conversation here today is your thinking around those decisions that you made around your own operating model, and also see how is that going for you and for your team.
All right, then.
So, Jim, I'll start off with a question for you. As you were investigating this change in your tax operating model, how did you conduct due diligence around your decision to engage in this way with Deloitte? And really, what was your personal investment in that decision?
Historically, frankly, like every accounting firm's come to me over the years and said that they could, quote, outsource parts of our work. A lot of times it was around state and local. And every time somebody came to me, we never really saw the bang for the buck, the efficiency of doing pieces of our process, much because I think we've done a very good job at making a lot of those processes efficient. But we took a step back and said, if we think about this differently, and maybe differently than even like a new model, can we split the work up differently so it's not just maybe a tax return task, but what parts of our financial accounting, what parts of our planning and forecasting could we split between what a Prudential tax person would do and an accounting firm tax person would do? And when we started breaking it down, it really became evident to us that we could really improve the quality of the jobs left in the tax department by taking out a lot of the work that the accountants don't enjoy doing. It's the documentation, the work paper referencing, or easier types of compliance and reporting. And we could break the work down into tasks. So once we reached that place, it became kind of an exciting exercise to start coming up with lists of things. Eventually, we came to about 30,000 hours of task that could be split up. My own personal investment was at the beginning, think about the art of the possible, how we could do this. And as we were approaching, it was a different model than any firm that I spoke to was thinking about. I'm not a fan of just handing over the tax department to somebody. We do a lot of work in the business. It's a complicated business. You really need to be in the mix to fully understand what's going on. But we found a model that we could do both. So once we figured out there was that model, then we really I personally got very much engaged in inspecting the work, inspecting the decision making, personally went to myself and visited the accounting firm's operation sites in India and got to know the quality of the resources in India to get myself comfortable that the model could work. I think it's very easy to say that in the 18 months or so that we were planning to do this, it was a significant part of the hours that I was working is overseeing this and really rolling up my sleeves, because if it failed, it was all going to be on me.
Yeah, that's great. And so you invested a lot of time, it sounds like, in designing the model that you believed was right for the company, as well as then evaluating the service providers and really making that decision.
Yeah, and I was fortunate that my team had a lot of detail on all the tasks, the hours each took, the different degrees of complexity of the task that allowed us to really break this down. The example I give that why it made so much sense to me is if, for example, we get to a year end and my accountant comes in and has to prepare a provision, and in an hour or two he's figured out he's got the right current and the right deferred, but then he spends 5 or 6 hours doing work papers and printing supports and doing Sarbanes-Oxley documentation, and now they're able to spend an hour doing the technical tax work and having a team behind them to do all that other work, which improves the job left in the tax department.
Yeah, that's another great thought around the quality of the jobs and the work that remains in your in-house tax department. And so many times, leaders will start to explore these types of models for cost savings purposes, right? So would you say you were originally motivated by cost savings and then you discovered these other benefits, or how do you think about the overall value proposition?
It's unavoidable to say yes. Within the company, we were looking to find cost savings. So no question there. Do I believe that if I went back and said, and any quote outsourcing model to my boss isn't going to work, this isn't accounting with just putting in debits and credits, I do believe that if I found that, I would have been able to go to my boss and make that pitch that I can't get the cost savings as in other areas. And even the cost savings we achieved are less than some of the accounting areas because that work, doesn't require as much technical expertise. So it was about starting off trying to see if we can get savings. But as we dug into it, we got more excited about, the quality of the job that would be left in the tax department, and that the team would now have some breaks between compliance, forecasting, quarterly reporting to actually do analysis.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. So you decided on your model, and that meant a lot of change for your tax department and your team members, I imagine, right? So could you share with us, how did you communicate that, and how did you get others in the department enrolled in that vision?
So it started off, it was just my senior team as we thought through the arts of the possible. And then we brought in some of the vice presidents who knew the work detail. But very early on, we felt it was important to be transparent to the team. So we made announcements about this is what we're looking at. We may or may not go in this direction. We have a lot of work and diligence that we need to do to see if the model will work. We asked people to participate in coming up with ideas on things that could be, moved. But over the course of the year plus, I spoke publicly quite a bit about where we were in the process. And to be honest, we got a lot of positive feedback from the team. It did cause some agita, obviously, but the feedback we received is they appreciated knowing what was being considered.
Right. Appreciated the transparency. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Excellent. Well, let's get some perspectives from Dianne also, because Dianne, I know you were one of the leaders who was very involved, right, in this process and decision making. So as you were getting enrolled in this vision yourself and helping to craft this, did you have particular concerns around making this shift, and if so, how have those kind of worked out as you've moved forward?
So yeah, Emily, as we were going through the process in the very beginning, I did have concerns. So I knew that any accounting firm, that the work would go to, their resources would be in India. That, that was, a lot of the work was going to be in India. And how was that going to work for us? And my second concern was about the time difference. So I knew that the accounting firms, the India teams work part of the US day, but I wasn't sure exactly how that was going to work because some of our times are very tight time constraints. So I'll address the first one. I know that Jim had gone to India to visit the teams of the accounting firms and met with the staff and came back very impressed with the quality of the individuals he met when he was in India on the Deloitte team. But then we started our first process we kicked off was in the middle of the pandemic, January 2020 close, I guess. And I could see right away during that process how the team was literally growing right before our eyes. Like they would do something, we'd have a conversation. Like by the time we got through a week, like they were just getting better and better. So that immediately put my concern at risk, saying this is great. It's the quality of the team is really, really good. This is going to be really good for the department. And to go to Jim's point, and what I was always telling my team too, is we're going to be left with the analytics. This is going to be such a good thing for us. Once I got my arms around how skilled the team was, I really knew that was definitely going to happen. And as far as my second concern around the time difference, that actually worked to our advantage because, we work especially in January when we kicked off, that's our busiest time. And we work a lot of long days, nights, weekends. And so we'd have part of the day with them. Then we'd work and do everything we had to do, turn it around. And then when we came in the next morning, all the work would be ready for us to review when we came in. So the time difference really was a benefit to us. And it works the same way in the compliance process as well.
Okay, excellent. And I know, Diane, our team's goal is always to really work with you and your team as if we're one team, right? And so can you give us any examples of kind of how that has worked out? How have you seen the teams really coming together and delivering as one?
It is actually, it's one team. That's all it is. There's no difference between the people on my team and the people in India on the Deloitte team. And I know that the international work stream and the state work stream that my peers work on, it's the same exact mindset. It's just one team. And we integrated that from the very beginning. So during each process, whether it's the quarter close or the year-end close or the compliance process, we have daily check-ins, and everybody gives their status of what's open. If my team has questions or the Deloitte team has questions, they get answered during those calls. I typically do participate in those calls because that's how I'm getting my status of where we are in the process. And then we include Deloitte in all of our trainings for each process. And this also includes Deloitte participating in the processes as a presenter. So for example, for the compliance process, they go through all the forms, they prepare a deck, and they do a training for international, for state, for federal compliance that I lead. They give us a presentation on what things changed on the form before we kick off the process. This year, we had a lot of new hires working on compliance, and they also gave trainings to the new hires so they could be familiar how to run reports and how to do inputs in corp tax and different things. And then the other aspect is, so not only is it a team, like I have check-ins twice a week with my team, but during these processes, the check-in is with Deloitte and my team every day, but also my team works directly with the Deloitte team. So they will, many times when we're on the check-in, they'll be like, okay, I'm going to call you back in Teams in 2 minutes. So if they're working on a specific project for one of my managers or my directors, they will work directly with the person one-on-one the same way someone on my team in the US would work with that person.
Great, great. Yeah, that's great. And then how about transition and really starting up this model? Because you were very involved in that as well, right? Any learnings or observations around that part of the process that you might want to share with others?
So I was fortunate that Jim included me right from the very beginning. And I think we took almost an entire year to start transitioning and planning to be prepared for kicking off on January 2nd. And basically, these were the things I thought were key to that being a success. So one, I think Jim referred to it earlier when he was answering one of your questions. We literally broke each process down, literally task by task, step by step, so that the transition would be at the lowest task that had to be performed and then build on it. We also prepared very detailed SOPs with step-by-step instructions for each process. And then to the extent that had to do with corp tax or where a file saved, we included screenshots. So that they could go to those decks at any time if they had a question and refer to it. So I felt that was very helpful. And I feel like the transition was very smooth. And I think a lot of that success is due to the hard work and the dedication of the Deloitte team.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So a lot of hard work and dedication on both sides, I would say, but it certainly has produced some really great results. So Jim, what's next? What's coming up next in your vision?
We can go further. So when we initially came up with our task, we held some things back because we were not 100% confident on how this would go, and it was a big risk. But now we're very confident in the team at Deloitte, and we're looking at what I'll call the next level or two up in complexity work, and to see if that can be shifted to Deloitte.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you both so much for sharing your perspectives. I know that's going to be very interesting to our listeners. So thank you for your time, and thank you to everyone who is kind of tuning in and listening to our podcast here. I hope you've enjoyed this interview, and I encourage you to check out our collection of interviews on the Deloitte Tax News and Views podcast series. And please watch out for our next upcoming episode. So Jim and Diane, thank you. Thank you again. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Emily.
Yep. Thanks, Emily.